On this Tuesday night, a passenger plane erupts into flames in Tokyo. How almost 400 people safely escaped this tragic crash.
It was a miracle.
As Japan recovers from strong earthquakes, what helped the country avert a bigger disaster? A top Hamas official killed. The potential acts of revenge. The rich just keep getting richer. The staggering amount of cash Canada's top executives are earning.
And that's also a new record.
How it compares to last year and who made the most. Plus, he captured cruelty with his camera. The life of fearless photojournalist Peter Magubane.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. 5 people have been killed in a fiery crash at Tokyo's Haneda airport after a Japan Airlines flight carrying hundreds of passengers collided with a Coast Guard plane. Video from the scene shows the Airbus A350 engulfed in flames. Miraculously, all 379 people on board survived. Those who died were on the smaller Coast Guard plane, which was supposed to deliver aid to victims of yesterday's powerful earthquake in central Japan. A government official says JAL Flight 516 was trying to land when it collided on the runway with a smaller Dash 8 aircraft sitting on the tarmac. The larger plane kept moving before coming to a standstill. Work is now underway to figure out how this happened. Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight.
From the airport terminal, Japan Airlines Flight 516 came into view as an enormous fireball hurtling down runway C. Inside the plane, passengers appeared calm, even as it filled with smoke, and as flames lit up the night sky outside. I felt the airplane tilt to the side on the runway and felt a big bump, said this passenger, recounting what may have been the moment the Airbus A350 struck a Japanese Coast Guard aircraft that was getting ready to take off. Once the Airbus came to a halt, the 12 crew helped all 367 passengers to safety. Within minutes, the fuselage was engulfed in fire. I can only say it was a miracle, said this passenger. We could have died if we were late evacuating. Back at the other end of the runway, the Coast Guard's Canadian-built Dash 8 was a fireball too. Of its 6 crew, only the pilot survived. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida paid tribute to the victims, who had been about to bring aid to those affected by Monday's earthquake in central Japan. Investigators will be checking air traffic communication recordings and looking for any technical issues to see how one plane ended up in another's path.
Rarely is there ever just a single cause. So for an aircraft to have actually ended up on the runway, there are several checks that should have stopped that from happening.
The survival of all the commercial passengers and crew, a reminder of how safe air travel has become, even when things go wrong. There were about 34 million commercial flights last year, but only 2 fatal crashes. None were involving jet aircraft. This crash, though, a reminder that safety can never be taken for granted. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
As mentioned, one of those planes was supposed to deliver aid to victims of yesterday's devastating earthquake. The magnitude 7.6 quake took down houses, damaged infrastructure, and knocked out power to more than 40,000 homes. 57 people are now confirmed dead. Global Affairs Canada says it hasn't received any reports of Canadian deaths. The full extent of the damage is still being assessed, and as Neetu Garcha reports, an urgent search is underway to save people who may be trapped in the rubble.
Aerial footage shows widespread damage in some of the areas hardest hit from the series of quakes that struck Japan on New Year's Day, leaving an entire section of Wajima City reduced to ashes. The quakes caused large cracks in roads and destroyed thousands of homes, complicating search and rescue efforts. The full extent of damage and death still difficult to assess. The Prime Minister said Japan's military sent 1,000 soldiers to disaster zones focusing on rescuing those trapped beneath the rubble. This resident is back to survey her wrecked home to find a familiar sight. Our house was like this after the last earthquake in 2007, she said. We had only just rebuilt our house.
It just started very slowly.
American Daniel Smith says what he felt and saw was powerful.
Then it was just a violent shaking. Violent shaking.
Some areas remain without water, power, and cell service. But Canadian earthquake experts say the country's immediate public warnings, the general public's response, followed by official recovery efforts, have helped prevent the situation from being worse.
We tend to have a false sense of security that it happens somewhere else, not where we are, both from the design perspectives as well as preparedness. There are a lot of things we can learn from events like this.
People who are not the most critical for first responders to reach should expect to be sheltering in place potentially for weeks if for an earthquake like this of this magnitude. Japan is the most prepared country in the world.
Putting into perspective the scale of damage here as officials warn of the potential for more quakes. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Russia has unleashed another round of deadly bombardments on Ukraine's two biggest cities, a day after Vladimir Putin vowed to intensify Moscow's attacks. Missiles and drones battered Ukraine's capital region, leaving at least 4 people dead and dozens more wounded across several residential neighborhoods. Kyiv's mayor says the attacks also targeted power and water infrastructure in the city. Strikes also caused widespread damage in the northeastern city of Kharkiv, where local officials have reported at least 1 death. In a statement, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia launched nearly 100 missiles in its latest attack, with Ukrainian forces shooting down almost 60 of them. In the Middle East, the Palestinian Red Crescent says its headquarters in Khan Yunis were targeted by an Israeli drone attack. Video shows paramedics scrambling to reach some of those injured in the strike. At least 5 people were killed. Israeli officials say they were targeting areas in the city where Hamas leaders were believed to be hiding. The Hamas-run health ministry says more than 200 people have been killed in the past 24 hours, pushing the Palestinian death toll over 22,000 since the October 7th attack. There are renewed concerns tonight over the risk of a wider Middle East conflict following the death of a senior Hamas official in Lebanon. The militant group's number 2 political leader is said to have been killed in an apparent Israeli drone strike in Beirut, marking a potentially significant escalation of the war. Jackson Proskow reports.
This is the aftermath of a suspected Israeli drone strike in Lebanon that Hamas says killed deputy leader Saleh al-Arouri and 2 other senior leaders of its military wing. Arouri had long been designated a global terrorist by the United States. Israel accuses him of leading lethal attacks on its citizens. Immediately, there were protests in the West Bank. Hamas called the assassinations a terrorist act and a violation of Lebanon's sovereignty. Israeli officials wouldn't respond when asked about the risk of retaliation, including potential long-range missile attacks launched from Lebanon by Hezbollah. The militant group claimed to have its finger on the trigger. Israel also faces accusations of operating inside Turkey, where officials claim to have arrested 33 suspected Israeli spies, alleging they planned to kidnap and kill Hamas officials. Israel has repeatedly been threatened with serious consequences if it attacked Hamas members outside of the Palestinian territories.
We are calling for maximum restraint from all parties. We don't want any rash actions that could trigger further violence.
Inside Gaza, where violence has displaced nearly 2 million people, there's no sign of relief. At this tent city in Rafah, food and warmth are in desperately short supply. It would have been better if I had stayed back in Gaza City and died with dignity, says this woman. The humanitarian situation is unlikely to get better, even as Israel says it will withdraw thousands of troops from Gaza in the coming weeks. Those troops could well be needed on the northern border with Lebanon, as the conflict sits on the cusp of a wider and more dangerous phase. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
South Korea's opposition leader has been hospitalized after being stabbed in the neck at a public event. And a warning, some viewers may find this video disturbing. Lee Jae-myung was wrapping up a visit to the city of Busan when a man approached Lee pretending to want an autograph before stabbing him with a knife. The attacker was arrested. Lee underwent surgery and is in intensive care. A new report shows the pay gap between this country's top CEOs and the average worker is breaking records. According to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the average CEO makes over $7,000 an hour. It takes them just over 8 hours to earn $60,000, what the average worker in Canada makes in an entire year. Mackenzie Gray reports on the widening pay gap as Canada's rich get richer.
Even by Ottawa standards, it was a quiet morning commute. But for those who did come downtown for work, by the time they got their first coffee of the day, Canada's top executives already earn more than a regular worker will all year.
They're just getting more money. You'll never spend that much money in your lifetime.
It's impossible to spend that much money. And they're profiting off of the people on the lower end of the economy.
And the money is staggering. The top 100 CEOs in Canada made on average $14.9 million annually in 2022, according to a new report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. That's a jump of over $600,000 from the past year.
CEOs made just under 250 times what the average worker makes. And that's a lot. And that's also a new record.
The highest earner, Patrick Doyle of Restaurant Brands International, the parent company of Burger King and Tim Hortons, making a whopping $151 million. But he wasn't paid a single cent in actual salary. His entire compensation in stock, a common trend, with only 8% of CEO compensation coming from a regular paycheck.
The fact that they can earn so much money from capital gains makes it all the more rewarding for them, and frankly, all the more insulting for the rest of us who actually earn money by working for it.
Companies justify compensation through stock by saying it incentivizes management to keep share prices high, but there's often no correlation. Take recently departed BlackBerry CEO John Chen. He made nearly $300 million during his time in Waterloo, despite the stock tanking 47%. During the same period, the S&P 500 rose 168%.
Whether a company is doing well or doing poorly, it seems the CEO's salary just goes up and up year after year.
The list of CEOs only had 4 women on it, tied with the number of people named Mark and Scott, with the Marks making on average $7 million more, Carolyn, than the women did.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks for that. A lot of drivers are pinching pennies to pay for gas. There's some relief coming up. What's fueling price changes at pumps across Canada? Canada's largest airline has been ranked last for on-time flights in North America. Air Canada landed 63% of its flights on time last year, the worst among the continent's 10 largest airlines. The score was 5% below the airlines in second and third place, both low-cost carriers in the U.S. Well, if driving is an option, Canadians are seeing some relief at the pump compared to this time last year. But as of this week, Alberta and Manitoba have had a major shift in the cost of gas. Heather Yurix West looks at what's driving prices in the prairies and what every Canadian driver can expect this year.
It's a gift for Manitoba drivers to start out the new year.
I would say that would take it from $130 a day to maybe $100, so that's $30 savings per day. And you do the month on that, it's nice.
Effective January 1st, that province's 14 cents a litre provincial pump tax has disappeared, gone for a 6-month holiday, a move designed to help residents with inflation.
I'm excited. You know, Manitoba needed a break.
A break that's come to an end in Alberta.
I'm not super impressed, you know. It's the last thing we kind of need right now.
After a nearly 2-year pause, Alberta's provincial pump tax was reinstated at the start of the year, though at a lower rate, 9 cents a litre now instead of 13.
It's made me kind of think of maybe my next vehicle might be a hybrid. Right? I don't think I'm ready for full electric yet.
Even after reinstating its pump tax, Alberta still has the lowest fuel costs in the country, with Saskatchewan and the newly provincial fuel tax-free Manitoba close behind. Elsewhere, Canadians pay anywhere from 15 to 50 cents more a litre.
No matter where in Canada you're filling up, chances are you're paying less at the pumps today than you were this time last year. And that's because globally the price of oil per barrel has fallen, though energy watchers warn that could soon change.
Some of the main factors to worry about are things like, well, whether or not the war in the Middle East winds down somewhat or ramps up somewhat. And even with it, the extra shipping costs that people are now incurring because they're avoiding that particular area.
Tax holiday or not, Canadians are likely to pay more to fill up before 2024 is through. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
Just ahead, how Nova Scotians are still searching for answers after a wildfire devastated the province. More than 7 months after a wildfire tore through parts of Nova Scotia, many are still working to rebuild their future. The destructive blaze forced thousands to flee and caused millions in damage. But those affected still have few answers as to what caused it. As Heidi Petracek explains, recent revelations have some calling on officials to be more forthcoming with information.
Jerry, hi, it's Greg White. I have appliances.
It's move-in day for Greg White. As workers haul a new fridge and stove into his new home after the one he'd lived in for 25 years on this same lot was destroyed in last year's Nova Scotia wildfires.
I feel great, but tired.
He's the first of those who lost their homes in this subdivision to get this far.
The key is you look for a win a day, a small win, even if it's checking the mail. That's a win when your life's upside down.
The lives of more than 16,000 Nova Scotians were upended by fire evacuations, and in the Halifax area, 150 homes burned down. Even as those homeowners move forward in this new year, there are still questions about just how the fire started. The police investigation quietly closed last fall, something the public didn't know until a residents group recently released the results of an access to information request. Documents in which the RCMP said the fire started as a result of, quote, unextinguished embers from a small outdoor patio fireplace, but found no criminal code offense noted. The matter is now in the hands of the province. No one from the group that requested this information could do an interview today, but a representative tells me they're very concerned officials didn't come forward with these details earlier, leaving them with so many questions on top of everything else.
The agencies involved in the investigations that are completed need to make themselves available for questioning.
There's a lot of rumors and hearsay and stuff like that, but you just can't wallow on those sort of things. It would be nice to have an acknowledgement of responsibility for sure.
As another truck backs into his driveway, White says he's trying his best now to focus on moving on as he finishes moving in this week. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Hammonds Plains, Nova Scotia.
The man behind the lens. Next, how Peter Magubani courageously documented decades of apartheid. The role that Nelson Mandela played in guiding South Africa out of the apartheid era is well known. But behind Mandela's public presence, South Africans like photographer Peter Magubani were risking their lives and their freedom to capture the violence and injustice. Magubani died on Monday at the age of 91. Eric Sorensen looks at the life of a man whose work behind the lens spoke volumes.
Apartheid in South Africa was racial discrimination at its most brutal. Peter Magubani was among the photographers who put their lives in danger to chronicle the struggle of blacks for equality. Magubani sometimes hid his camera in a loaf of bread to take pictures. Still, he was arrested, imprisoned, and beaten.
The death of the legendary Dr. Magubani.
On the South African Broadcasting Corporation's coverage, he was remembered for his work at the Soweto uprising in 1976. Magubani had to persuade frightened protesters to be photographed.
He engaged them to say, this picture will tell a story, not just now, not just today, but forever. And I think the preservation of those photographs that he have taken. We will ensure that his legacy lives on through the preservation of his various works.
Magubani knew young Nelson Mandela, and when Mandela was released from 27 years in prison, Magubani became his personal photographer.
When he came out of prison, he chose me to be his photographer, to follow him up wherever he's going. And the body of work that I have here, it is because of him having selected me.
Magubani's personal favorite was this photograph of a black nanny separated by a bench from the white child she was caring for.
And they had to take tremendous risks to get any photographic footage at all.
al-Arouri says that peaceful image in its own way tells the appalling story of apartheid.
The nanny could not sit next to the child. That would be illegal. And yet the image is so sweet and caring, but there's such menace behind what he's depicting there.
Like the photograph taken by his colleague Sam Nzima of a murdered child that became the iconic image of the Soweto uprising, Magubani's images were consequential at the time, and they remain an important legacy in the fight for justice in South Africa. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is Weaselhead Flats Park in Calgary, Alberta. We love seeing your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow night. See you then.